Welcome back to our channel, bringing you the most explosive, heart-wrenching, and dramatic updates from the glamorous yet treacherous world of the bold and the beautiful. Today is a day that will forever alter the landscape of Forrester Creations, as we dive deep into a catastrophic tragedy that has left families shattered and lives hanging in the balance. The corporate warfare at Forrester Creations has finally reached its absolute breaking point, culminating in a psychological snap that no one could have truly anticipated. On May 22nd, the tension that had been simmering for weeks finally boiled over into a catastrophic eruption. Hope Logan Spencer, having endured relentless marginalization, condescension, and outright cruelty from Steffy Forrester Finnegan, made the ultimate decision to sever her ties with the legacy company. When Hope cornered Steffy for a definitive relaunch date for the Hope for the Future line, she was met not with professional courtesy, but with dismissive arrogance and cruel mockery regarding her past with Carter Walton. In that defining moment, the heavy chains of familial obligation and corporate loyalty shattered. Hope officially resigned, leaving Steffy utterly blindsided and fundamentally altering the power dynamics of the Los Angeles fashion world. But this profound act of liberation was merely the catalyst for a much darker, far more devastating sequence of events. The news of Hope's abrupt and explosive resignation traveled through the labyrinthine corridors of Forrester Creations and quickly reached the ears of Brooke Logan Forrester. For days, Brooke had been attempting to play a dangerous, hypocritical game of corporate chess. She had initially launched a hostile takeover bid for Steffy's co-CEO seat at Hope's urging, only to shockingly pivot and send Steffy a highly diplomatic text praising her leadership in a desperate bid to protect her marriage to Ridge Forrester. Brooke had foolishly believed she could navigate the treacherous waters of her daughter's ambition and her husband's cowardice. But the moment she received the devastating confirmation that Hope had actually walked away, that fragile illusion of control completely disintegrated. The realization that her diplomatic retreat had directly resulted in her daughter's professional exile hit Brooke with the force of a physical blow. Her maternal instinct, long suppressed by her desire for marital harmony, violently resurrected itself, consuming her entirely. Driven by a blinding cocktail of panic, profound guilt, and absolute fury, Brooke rushed to her vehicle. The sleek, powerful car, usually a symbol of her status and success, transformed into a vessel of her unraveling sanity. As she pulled out onto the unforgiving asphalt of the Pacific Coast Highway, the world outside her windshield blurred into a chaotic symphony of motion and color. Tears of sheer desperation streamed down her flawless cheeks, stinging her eyes and clouding her vision. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, each beat echoing the catastrophic failure she felt as a mother. She had promised Hope that they would fight this battle together, that they would reclaim their rightful place in the Forrester hierarchy. Instead, she had abandoned her daughter on the battlefield, leaving her to be slaughtered by Steffy's unchecked tyranny. The crushing weight of that betrayal pressed down on Brooke's chest, making it entirely impossible to draw a full breath as she accelerated down the winding coastal road. Unable to contain the volcanic eruption of her emotions, Brooke connected her phone to the car's Bluetooth system and dialed the one man responsible for this entire nightmare, Ridge Forrester. The moment his deep, familiar voice filled the cabin of the car, Brooke unleashed a torrent of pent-up devastation. She screamed into the microphone, her voice cracking with a raw, visceral agony that stripped away decades of composed elegance. She viciously indicted Ridge for his pathetic cowardice, his endless empty promises, and his complete inability to tame the tyrannical monster his daughter had become. She reminded him, with blistering cruelty, of the pathetic couture dress he had offered her as a peace offering, a hollow, insulting gesture meant to placate her, while Steffy systematically dismantled Hope's entire career. The argument escalated into a deafening crescendo of accusations and heartbreak, with Brooke's desperate cries echoing off the luxurious leather interior of her speeding vehicle. Ridge, sitting in the opulent, sterile environment of the CEO office, attempted to interject, attempting to deploy his usual arsenal of charming deflections and passive excuses. But Brooke was entirely beyond the reach of reason. Her focus, entirely consumed by the blinding rage directed at her husband, shifted dangerously away from the treacherous, winding road ahead. As she navigated a particularly perilous curve hugging the jagged California coastline, her tear-filled eyes failed to register the sharp deviation in the asphalt. The sequence of events that followed unfolded in a horrifying, agonizing slow motion. The sudden, desperate jerk of the steering wheel. The violent, ear-piercing screech of tires losing their desperate grip on the pavement. The sickening crunch of metal tearing through the reinforced steel guardrail. And then, the terrifying, weightless sensation of the vehicle plummeting into the unforgiving abyss below. On the other end of the phone line, the argument abruptly ceased, replaced by a symphony of pure, unadulterated mechanical terror. Ridge heard the violent shattering of safety glass, the catastrophic crumpling of heavy steel, and a single, breathless gasp from the woman he claimed to love more than life itself. And then there was nothing but a chilling, absolute silence. The Bluetooth connection severed, leaving Ridge standing in the center of Forrester Creations, the phone slipping from his trembling fingers and crashing onto the hardwood floor. In that singular, horrifying fraction of a second, the corporate warfare, the co-CEO title, and the petty generational squabbles evaporated into absolute insignificance. The mighty Ridge Forrester, the patriarch who had spent weeks cowardly avoiding conflict, was instantly reduced to a terrified, paralyzed husband, staring into the void of his own making. The transition from the glamorous, high-stakes world of haute couture to the sterile, unforgiving reality of the intensive care unit was a jarring, nightmarish blur. Brooke's mangled vehicle had been recovered from the jagged rocks below the highway, and she had been rushed into emergency surgery, her life hanging by the most fragile of threads. Now, she lay in a clinically white hospital room, surrounded by a cacophony of rhythmic beeps and the mechanical hiss of a ventilator. Her beautiful face, usually radiating with vibrant energy and unyielding determination, was pale, bruised, and frighteningly still. Tubes and wires snaked across her fragile form, tethering her to the mortal realm. The sheer brutality of her condition stood in stark, horrifying contrast to the superficial beauty of the fashion empire she had helped build. Sitting in a rigid plastic chair beside her bed, Ridge Forrester looked like a hollow, shattered shell of a man. He had completely abandoned the Forrester Creations building, dropping every single ounce of his corporate authority the moment he received the location of the crash. As he stared at the rhythmic rise and fall of Brooke's chest, propelled entirely by a machine, a profound, suffocating wave of remorse crashed over him. This was the direct, undeniable consequence of his actions. His desperate need to avoid conflict, his cowardly refusal to check Steffy's arrogant cruelty, and his pathetic, empty promises to his wife had paved the exact road that led Brooke off that cliff. He had promised Brooke that Hope would always have a secure home at Forrester Creations. He had broken that promise, and in doing so, he had fundamentally broken his wife. The guilt was a living, breathing entity inside his chest, tearing at his soul with unforgiving claws. Miles away, within the bustling, optimistic walls of the Logan Fashion House, Hope Logan Spencer was experiencing a completely different kind of psychological torture. She had fled to her Aunt Katie's sanctuary immediately after delivering her resignation to Steffy, seeking the maternal comfort and professional validation that her own mother had failed to provide. Liam and Bill Spencer had been there, fiercely advocating for her, celebrating her liberation from Steffy's toxic regime. Hope had felt a fleeting, intoxicating rush of vindication. But that fragile high was violently obliterated the moment the phone call came in from the hospital. The transition from the triumphant reclamation of her career to the agonizing horror of her mother's critical condition was so abrupt, so brutally sudden that it sent Hope to her knees right there in the middle of the design room. The guilt that immediately consumed Hope was absolute, suffocating, and terrifyingly dark. As Liam desperately tried to hold her trembling body, Hope's mind spiraled into a labyrinth of self-blame and agonizing regret. It was her fault. The thought repeated in her mind like a relentless, torturous mantra. She was the one who had pushed Brooke into this ruthless power war. She was the one who had radicalized her mother, demanding that Brooke launch a hostile takeover for Steffy's co-CEO seat just to save the hope for the future line. She had manipulated Brooke's fierce maternal instincts, weaponizing her mother's love to fight a corporate battle that had ultimately led to this catastrophic tragedy. If she had just walked away sooner, if she had just accepted Katie's offer without dragging Brooke into the mud, her mother would not be fighting for her life in a sterile hospital bed. The blood, Hope truly believed, was entirely on her hands. The psychological torment tearing through Hope's mind was a devastating thing to witness. She looked back at her relentless ambition, her desperate need to salvage her fashion line, and suddenly saw it all as a toxic, poisonous curse. What did the hope for the future brand even matter now? What did the youth demographic, the sales numbers, or the prestige of the Forrester name mean when the woman who had given her life was hovering on the precipice of death? The sheer irony of the entire situation was a bitter, jagged pill to swallow. They had waged a vicious, uncompromising war for control, for titles, for respect within a company that ultimately cared nothing for their well-being. And the ultimate price of that ambition was exactly what lay broken in the intensive care unit. Hope realized, with a sickening clarity, that she had sacrificed her mother upon the altar of her own career. The ripple effects of this cataclysmic event began to spread outward, threatening to engulf the entirety of Forrester Creations. Steffy Forrester Finnegan, who had spent the entire day reveling in her arrogant victory and mocking Hope's departure, now faced a chilling, undeniable reality. Her relentless cruelty, her refusal to compromise, and her vindictive need to utterly crush Hope had been the primary catalyst for this entire chain of events. While Steffi had not driven the car off the cliff, her toxic leadership had created the exact environment of desperation and panic that led to the crash. As the news of Brooke's critical condition permeated the executive offices, a dark, suffocating shadow fell over Steffi's highly coveted co-CEO seat. The victory she had fought so ruthlessly to secure was now permanently stained with tragedy. Would this horrific event finally pierce the impenetrable armor of Steffi's arrogance? Would she feel the heavy, crushing weight of remorse? Or would she retreat further into her defensive, entitled shell? As the Forrester and Logan families braced themselves for the agonizing uncertainty of the days ahead, the landscape of their interconnected lives has been irrevocably altered. The petty squabbles over fashion lines and executive titles have been violently stripped away, leaving only the raw, bleeding core of human fragility. Ridge remains tethered to Brooke's bedside, a broken patriarch praying for a miracle he feels he does not deserve. Hope remains trapped in a prison of her own agonizing guilt, forever questioning the true cost of her ambition. And as the monitors in the hospital room continue their rhythmic mechanical vigil, the ultimate question hangs heavily in the sterile air: can love, regret, and family loyalty pull Brooke Logan Forrester back from the edge of the abyss, or has the toxic, unforgiving war for Forrester